Óscar de la Cruz, Professor Óscar de la Cruz, Professor of Latin Philology at the Autónoma, the Universitat Autónoma de Barcelona. He has published and continues to work on editions of various Latin texts from the medieval and early modern periods. Óscar and I have a joint love for someone called Ramon Llull. We both love. Maybe love is a bit too strong. No. Okay. He, together with Ulisse, who we heard before, are very much responsible for the edition of the Extracciones, and he will speak to us about the Paris manuscript of the Talmud dossier. Óscar will speak in Spanish, and our friend here, Dov, will translate into Hebrew. Okay, so
I will try. I will be the linguistic Judas Iscariot.
Muchas gracias, ilustre decano, por esta sesión y a los profesores por estar, por aportar su conocimiento, su inteligencia y por concederme hablar en castellano, porque mi inglés es imposible. Entonces era mejor, digamos, acudir a una comunicación mediatizada por nuestro compañero. Debemos repartir este
טוב, אוסקר מודה לכולם על ההזדמנות הזאת גם להתבטא בספרדית.
Debemos repartir este turno de intervención entre algunos compañeros y por lo tanto tenemos la indicación de ser muy breves. Se trata en mi caso de presentar algunos aspectos más bien de carácter filológico sobre la transmisión de las extracciones.
הוא הולך לדבר על כמה היבטים פילולוגיים על האקסטרקציונס.
En la intervención del profesor Fidora y también de mi colega, también el profesor Cecchini, han hecho una parte del trabajo de exposición haciendo alusión a los manuscritos que conservan total o parcialmente las extracciones de Talmud.
בשתי ההרצאות הקודמות כבר הובאו הכתבי יד השונים שקשורים לאקסטרקציונס.
Ciertamente, la traducción latina del Talmud, la traducción secuencial del Talmud, a la que llamamos por los manuscritos extracciones de Talmud, es una parte de un dossier mucho más complejo que ambiguamente también se alude como extracciones de Talmud.
למעשה, האקסטרקציונס של התלמוד הוא חלק מסוגיה הרבה יותר מורכבת, שגם קוראים לה מתוך נוחות אקסטרקציונס, אבל היא לא זהה לחלוטין.
También, como ha explicado Alexander, las extracciones de Talmud fueron traducidas después de la condena del Talmud y por lo tanto podemos situarnos hacia 1244-1245.
מזכיר שהאקסטרקציונס נכתבו אחרי שרפת התלמוד, ואם כן הוא מזכיר שניתן לתארכם בין 1244-45.
Es por eso que esta traducción latina del Talmud es una especie de conclusión de un proceso histórico sobre el Talmud que culmina en el Acto de París de 1240.
לכן האקסטרקציונס זה למעשה סוף של תהליך שלמעשה הסתיים בשרפת התלמוד ב-1240.
El llamado también dossier de Talmud, o grosso modo las extracciones, incluía las cartas de condena del Talmud, básicamente son estas.
הנושא של האקסטרקציונס כלל בתוכם מכתבי גינוי כנגד התלמוד.
Incluía las denuncias de Nicolás Donen al Papa en primera instancia, elaborada hacia 1238 o 39.
כלל בתוכה את ההאשמות של ניקולס דונין אל מול האפיפיור מ-1238-39.
Las denuncias de Donen, los artículos de Donen venían ilustrados con traducciones también del Talmud en primera instancia.
ההאשמות האלה של דונן היו מלוות בדוגמאות מהתלמוד.
Y interpretamos que este pequeño tratado dentro del dossier que colecciona varios pasajes del Talmud forman parte del material de Donen para redactar sus denuncias.
ואנו חושבים שהחלק שנקרא דקויבוס ואן ליברורום למעשה זה אסופה של קטעים שאחר כך דונן השתמש באקסטרקציונס.
De manera aislada se hicieron traducciones de las glosas de Rashi, también compiladas como un pequeño tratado en todo este dossier.
בנפרד יש גם כן פירושים על מסביב לפרשנויות או איסוף של פרשנות רש"י.
Estos son nuevamente las declaraciones de los testigos del proceso de París de 1240.
אלו הם ההצהרות של עדים של פריז מ-1240.
Y por lo tanto las extracciones de Talmud, la traducción secuencial del Talmud, aunque es la parte principal, no es más que un tratado del complejo digamos dossier del Talmud.
ולכן האקסטרקציונס של התלמוד זה חלק מדוסייר הרבה יותר רחב.
Una vez obtenida la traducción secuencial del Talmud, las extracciones de Talmud, a su vez esta traducción secuencial, como ha explicado Alexander, fue reorganizada temáticamente en estos tratados.
אם כן, כפי שאלכסנדר פידורה כבר אמר, הארגון שהוא כינה כרונולוגי סקוונציאלי של קטעי התלמוד, אחר כך עבר לארגון תמטי.
Y finalmente hablará nuestro colega Isaac Lampurlanés, que a partir de la organización temática de las extracciones todavía aparecerá un epítome, una obra breve de estos tratados.
וכפי שידבר מיד אחר כך איסאק למפורלנס, אחרי הרשימה התמטית הזאת יש גם כן עוד נספח קשור.
El único manuscrito que contiene todo el dossier es el manuscrito de París, es este de aquí.
הכתב יד העותק היחידי שכולל בתוכו את כל הדוסייר הוא הכתב יד של פריז.
Del que hay que llamar la atención porque efectivamente es el manuscrito más importante para toda la bibliografía que existe en cuanto a las extracciones.
הוא הכתב יד המשמעותי ביותר על מנת להבין את המכלול הביבליוגרפי הקשור לאקסטרקציונס.
Es un manuscrito que después veremos, pero que se puede ver en color y gratuitamente en la página de la Biblioteca Nacional de París Gálica.
ניתן לראותו דרך הרשת באתר גליקה של ספריית פריז, של ספריית הלאומית בפריז.
A su vez, no solamente es el manuscrito más completo que contiene todos estos tratados, sino que es el más antiguo de la tradición manuscrita del siglo XIII. Pero desde el punto de vista filológico se produce un problema muy hermoso. Que es cumpliendo el famoso principio requentiores non deteriores, ¿no? Es decir, el manuscrito de Firenze, un manuscrito que ha enseñado Ulises, es hebreo con traducciones anotadas en el margen de las extracciones.
בעוד כתב את פירנצה הוא כתב יד פירנצה הוא כתב יד בעברית, לטינית עם ציטטות בעברית בצד.
Representaría el primer estadio de la traducción, es decir, el equipo probablemente tradujo el Talmud anotándolo al lado del texto hebreo.
אז אני טעיתי, כן, זה אם כן העברית והציטטות בלטינית, ואז אם כן זה אולי היה השלב הראשון של העברית.
Después de obtenida esta traducción, digamos, bilingüe, el texto fue aislado, fue copiado solamente en latín.
לאחר מכן הטקסט נבדל והוא עתק רק החלק הלטיני.
Y esta copia en limpio está representada en el manuscrito de Berlín, que es muy tardío, es del siglo XV.
והעתק הזה הוא נמצא בברלין. לא, סליחה, לא בדיוק.
זאת אומרת, סליחה דור.
לא, ההפך, בבקשה.
לא,
אמרתי מי יהיה.
המעבר, העדות הטובה ביותר למעבר לשלב הלטיני בלבד, אפשר למצוא בכתב יד של ברלין, אבל הוא מאוחר, כן, הוא מהמאה ה-15.
Cuando se ha producido esta copia de aislamiento del texto latino, han sucedido algunas cosas importantes. Por ejemplo, algunos pasajes ya no fueron copiados, de manera que Firenze es el único manuscrito que contiene algunos de los pasajes de las extracciones, por ejemplo.
כן, לא הכל הוא עבר בלטינית, אלא חלק, אז בבקשה.
לא.
סליחה. אלא חלק נשאר בכתב יד פירנצה.
A su vez, el manuscrito hebreo, que como todos saben se lee al revés de los manuscritos latinos, fue copiado inversamente en la foliación inversa en los últimos tratados.
העימוד העברי, אשר הוא הפוך מבחינת הכתיבה באשר ללועזי או ללטיני, מופיע הפוך בהעתקים מאוחרים.
Es por eso que además del problema del orden del canon del Talmud que utilizan, se suma el orden en la copia, es decir, desorden por el canon y desorden por la copia.
ועל כן יש גם בעיה מבחינת הסדר ההופעה, כן, לפי התלמוד, הקאנון התלמודי, וגם האופן שבו הוא מופיע.
Este texto latino aislado fue corregido, estilizado y nuevamente seleccionado, perdiendo todavía algunos lugares que solamente conserva Berlín y Firenze entonces.
מה שהוא הצביע זה שבגרסה הזאת היא גרסה עוד יותר שעבדו עליה מהטקסט הלטיני, אבל היא איבדה חלק מהחומר ביחס ה-second edition, ועל כן זה אבל נמצא, החלקים האלה כמובן בגרסה של פירנצה וזו של ברלין.
A partir de esta copia en limpio y estilizada de las extracciones, se sumaron los tratados históricos, las condenas de los papas, se sumaron las denuncias de Donen y se añadieron los prólogos a las partes, es decir, se fabricó el dossier.
ועל בסיס הגרסה אומנם החסרה, אבל המעובדת הזאת, אז הכניסו את כל המכתבים, את הגינויים, את העדויות וכו' וכו', שעשו את הדוסייה כולו.
Otro problema muy bonito filológicamente que podemos ver en la tarde es el siguiente.
עוד עניין יפה מבחינה פילולוגית, שנראה אותו אחרי הצהריים, הוא הבעיה הבאה.
Este texto de las extracciones con los documentos ya añadidos fue copiado finalmente en el manuscrito de París, que, repito, aunque es el más antiguo codicológicamente, representa el texto más elaborado, más tardío.
אם כן, על בסיס זה, הטקסט הזה, הדוסי הזה, הוא זה שהוא עבר לכתב יד פריז, שאם כן, למרות שהוא העתיק ביותר מבחינה קודיקולוגית הוא זה שמביא בתוכו חומרים מאוחרים יותר.
Pero antes he dicho que la versión temática de las extracciones es una reelaboración de la secuencial más algunos aspectos de Donen, es una mezcla de documentos. Es este tratado de aquí, esto es la temática.
והנה יש שמה הגרסה התמטית.
De manera que filológicamente es muy hermoso ver que la temática conserva un estadio textual a veces anterior al manuscrito de P.
ואז מה שיפה לראות זה שהגרסה התמטית היא למעשה, יש לה בתוכה תכנים מגרסה הקודמת לגרסה של פריז.
Para la tradición del texto es importante remarcar, también lo han dicho los compañeros, que hay el único manuscrito que transmite todo el dossier es el manuscrito de París, pero hay manuscritos que solamente transmiten la temática.
אם כן, הגרסה המלאה ביותר זו של פריז, אבל יש כתבי יד אחרים שמביאים את הגרסה התמטית.
Sin embargo, el manuscrito de París en realidad es un compuesto codicológicamente de 3 manuscritos independientes.
אז למעשה, כתב היד פריז הוא אסופה של 3 כתבי יד שונים.
Hay solamente 4 folios para el primer manuscrito.
4 עמודים לכתב היד הראשון.
El segundo manuscrito encuadernado es la temática.
הכתב היד השני הכרוך הוא התמטי.
Y el tercer manuscrito encuadernado son las extracciones y los documentos históricos.
והכתב היד השלישי זה האקסטרקציונס עם כל המסמכים הנלווים.
Hay algunas evidencias como el propio calidad del pergamino o bien la enumeración de los folios que evidencian que eran originalmente 3 manuscritos.
איכות הדפים מראה שמוכיח שהם כתבי יד ממוצא שונה.
Por lo tanto, aunque el manuscrito P efectivamente es el único que transmite todo el dossier, se puede decir que codicológicamente la transmisión de la temática es independiente.
כך שגם אם הוא כתב היד P הוא זה שמעביר את כל הדוסייה, מבחינה קודיקולוגית יש להבדיל בין חלקיו.
Es posible que el responsable de la fabricación de este volumen del manuscrito P sea el maestro Pere de Llemoches. De acuerdo con el explicit que leemos en el manuscrito, que es el siguiente: Iste liber spauperum magistrorum de Sorbona ex legato magistri Petri de Lemovicis quondam socidomus uius, el profesor de la Sorbona, in quo continetur Talmud Iudeorum.
אם כן, מי שכנראה יצר את החיבור הזה הוא המרצה בסורבון פטרי דה למוביקיס.
Pedro de Limoges donó a la biblioteca de la Sorbona unos 125 manuscritos, algunos de ellos encuadernados por él mismo.
הוא זה אשר תרם לסורבון כ-125 כתבי יד, חלקם הוא בעצמו כרך אותם.
Para acabar, quizás si tengo tiempo, tengo un minuto, podría poner uno de los que quiero compartir, un misterio que guarda este manuscrito.
אני רוצה לשתף איתכם במסתורין שישנו בכתב היד הזה.
Después de los documentos históricos aparece el explicit antes de un índice de lugares bíblicos.
אחרי כל המסמכים ההיסטוריים מופיע את האקספליסיט.
Dice así: aquí acaba la obra inconclusa contra la voluntad de su autor.
כאן מסתיימת היצירה הבלתי גמורה כנגד רצון מחבריו.
Después aparece una laudatio a Dios, una condena a los judíos y el misterio Amer, Anime, Amen, Anime, Finis y quizá Jesús y quizá Joshua. Y quizá Jesús Sinis Joshua, que es de paso a Joshua. Es un misterio de este manuscrito.
יש גם ליד הפיניס כנראה מצד ימין יזוס ומצד שמאל יהושע.
Bueno, solamente quería llamar la atención sobre la importancia de este manuscrito y profundizar un poco más en su transmisión. Muchas gracias, profesor, también por la traducción.
Are there any questions immediately? Any immediate questions?
Yes, so what was the decision made by the group in editing all this problematic dossier? Can you say something about your decision in the edition of the Latin Talmud?
La decisión. Hay un criterio que es una decisión y por lo tanto discutible, si uno quiere, pero que hemos tomado desde el principio.
נקטנו בעמדה שניתן לחלוק עליה, אבל החלטנו עליה מההתחלה.
Que es la condición de la aparición de los lugares bíblicos en las extracciones.
שהם המיקום של הציטט של המובאות מן התנ"ך בתוך האקסטרקציונס.
Calculamos que el 25% del texto de las extracciones son citas directas de lugares bíblicos.
אנו מניחים ש-25% מהאקסטרקציונס יש להם מובאות מן התנ"ך.
Así que hemos tomado como un punto muy importante a la hora de establecer los criterios ser coherentes con la edición de la Biblia de Stuttgart.
ולכן אנחנו נקטנו בתור מדיניות לנסות ולהיות קוהרנטים יחד עם גרסת הביבליה של שטוטגרט.
De manera que evitamos una especie de esquizofrenia, una doble personalidad entre las citas bíblicas y el texto talmúdico.
כך שניסינו למנוע סכיזופרניה, מצב סכיזופרני בין הציטטות התנ"כיות לבין אלה של התלמוד.
Los criterios de la Biblia, de la edición vulgata de Stuttgart, son criterios clasicizantes, etcétera, pero digamos, básicamente ahí podríamos explicar más detalles, ¿no?
הקריטריונים של הבולגת המושג שטוטגרט יש להם ניחוח קלאסיסיסטי, אבל על זה ניתן לדבר אחר.
Yes, and for what concerns the manuscripts, as we didn't choose one reference manuscript, but we practically made a collation because of the different redaction stages and the complex histories between the manuscript. We did a collation between whole manuscripts and compared it with Talmud manuscripts, medieval Talmud manuscripts such as the Florence Talmud and the Munich Talmud, which are chronologically also and textually parallel to the extracciones, as my colleague Annabel González will then say.
What you get is a synthetic edition at the end?
Yeah, yes, it's a polymorphic edition which takes in account all stages of redaction, because if we had chosen P, which is, as Óscar said, the most important manuscript, if you will, and also in scholarship, we would have given a partial image of the tradition without taking in account Florence, which not only is witness of passages which are only there, but also the redaction of the text was corrected between Florence and Paris. So sometimes, and watching the Hebrew manuscript, sometimes we had to accept the variant of Florence, sometimes from Paris, and so this is an edition which must be read with the critical apparatus. Thank you.
Rami.
¿Puede usted explicar otra vez el último parte con el misterio?
Digo que en el expliquit del manuscrito de París aparece esta redacción, explicit in consummatum, etc. Y finalmente una línea, dos líneas que no entendemos bien. Es decir, tenemos muchas hipótesis, quiere decir que no lo entendemos bien, en la cual leemos amer, anime o animae, amen, anime, y quizá Jesús, quizá finis, o en su inverso, sinis. De aquí el dibujo de una F que equivale a una S para que sea legible en las dos direcciones, y quizá Joshua. Quería poner el problema por si alguien nos ayuda con esto.
כולם הבינו? טוב,
שאלה הייתה לחזור שוב על החלק האחרון עם המסתורים, לא הבנתי.
כן, היו הרבה מאוד דיונים בינינו בתוך הקבוצה על השורות האלה. אוסקר הוא הסמן הימני, שרוצה לראות בזה איזשהו אולי התייחסות לתרגום שאולי sorry, in English, sorry. So Óscar wants to see in this, right, something perhaps that reflects the work of the translators, that shows, that might have some Jewish, right, or the Jewish aspects of it. Other members of the group think that perhaps the reading is a little too radical, but that's the way Óscar wanted to finish with what we have here at the end of the explicit of the text. Óscar, thank you.
Thank you.
To invite Yakov Meyer, who's a PhD candidate in Tel Aviv University, working on his dissertation title is From Manuscript to Print, the Palestinian Talmud and Venetian Print Culture in the Early Modern Period. But today he's going to speak to us on what did they burn when they burned the Talmud, and I'm delighted to make his acquaintance.
Well, hello. Thank you very much for the organizers for inviting me to speak and to think aloud with all of you. I already received a compliment that the title of my lecture is very interesting. So I have to start and say that I don't know what did they burn when they burned the Talmud. I think it's a good question. Since when we count books with the wagons? Let's speak about 20 or 24 wagons of books. I wonder if we collect all the manuscript, even the Latin manuscript in all of Paris, if we can fill this amount of books. And in a letter, Donen wrote 5 or 6 years after the burning, he says, well, I collected again the books and I found 5 corrupted copies of the Talmud. So I wonder how many were there from the beginning, but this won't be the question I will deal with here. So I just stopped. We see the manuscript culture through the veil of print. Bookstores are stored today with those cheap objects, copied in thousands of copies, covered with soft-colored bindings that might be found regularly thrown by the bed, stained with coffee and food leftovers, smashed and torn apart. They do not meant to survive regularly for more than a couple of readings, and when the time comes, there is no problem to throw them to the recycle bin. It is not a big economical loss, and there is clearly no danger to the future existence of John Grisham's literary heritage if a generic copy of his book will be destroyed. But manuscript? Manuscripts are a different story. Few of us have ever held an original manuscript. Its value is behind every measurement. Each and every manuscript is unique, said a print culture well-educated pupil. Each one contains various valuable variants. We think about the burning of 24 wagons full of manuscripts in Paris 1241 or 42. Compare it to the current situation, when in all of the libraries of Europe, Israel and the States, we can't find more than 65 complete manuscripts of tractates of the Talmud, and our heart is about to break down from sorrow. We think about the manuscript culture through the veil of print, and the variation and the uniqueness of the manuscripts seem to us the main feature of the medieval book. But how did medieval consumers of text have thought about the manuscript they were holding? How did consumers of the first fruits of the printing press thought about their books? This investigation is quite problematic. When we read a book, we usually concentrate on its words, not on the physical object. This is the nature of literature that tempts us to sink into the text and to enter through it to a literary imagined realm. But the question I raised here is not about the content of the Talmud, but about the meaning readers attributed to the physical objects that contains the literary text. The physical object's main purpose is not to interrupt the transmission of knowledge. Therefore, if we do hear about it, it is usually because there is a problem with it. There are usually only 2 points. You hear me? Everything looks? Yeah. There are usually only 2 points in a biography of a book when an account about its physical appearance and its meaning might be created. Its creation, when the decisions about its physical character are taken, and its destruction. A rare opportunity to understand the nature of the medieval and early modern book cultures occurred to us through the burnings of the Talmud. The Talmud was burned twice, once in 13th century Paris and once in 16th century Italy, once after the Fourth Ecumenical Council and once after the Fifth. In both cases, the Talmud condemned to be burned, but on the first occasion manuscripts of the Talmud were burned, and on the latter, printed books. A careful comparison between the two will let us understand what was the historical role of those objects in the eyes of their consumers. I wish to start my inquiry with quite an elected source for the burning of the Talmud. In Responsum, let's see if it works. In Responsum, written by Rabbi Shmuel ben Shlomo from Falaise, one of the scholars that were involved in the famous dispute about the Talmud in Paris, short time after the dispute was over, and the Talmud was burned to dust. Rabbi Shmuel was asked a question sent from Dura in Germany. I won't describe here the whole complicated plot, but I will say that the questioner, a certain rich man, asked Rabbi Shmuel ben Shlomo if he can force his daughter's rebellious groom to divorce from her. Rabbi Shmuel ben Shlomo opens the response with the following poetic statement. I will read it in English. My spirit is gone, my power weakened, the light of my eyes, my ability to see, disappeared because of the oppressor who defeated us strongly and took our soul and beloved one. So we do not have any book now to study and to understand. God will show his zealousness and will say enough to our troubles, etc., etc. Rabbi Shmuel ben Shlomo is mourning the burned Talmud, saying he doesn't have any book to read after the catastrophe. Indeed, it might be sarcastically deduced, if he can't see anymore, the physical book won't necessarily help him to gain knowledge and understanding. Surprisingly, or not surprisingly, the short responsum, no more than 750 words length, contains 10 different quotations from the Babylonian Talmud, one from the Palestinian Talmud, and few quotes of Rashi and other medieval halachic authorities. The lack of physical books does not mean lack of Talmudic knowledge. Only one time does the writer say he can't quote because he doesn't have a book with him. Last year, this question came in front of us, and we said the man is guilty. I mean, he can't divorce his wife. And I asked everyone who sees my responsum not to judge me. He's right for shigionot. I think we have to translate it for my second thoughts in my new responsum. because they do not have a heart and not a book, and Master of Israel will have mercy upon his nation. Rabbi Shmuel ben Shlomo says he already dealt with a similar question, but he doesn't have a heart, memory, or a book, a copy of the previous responsum. So we ask the reader who read this new responsum and might have a copy of the previous one not to judge him out of a comparison of the two. The Talmud books were certainly burned down. It is a huge tragedy for the whole nation. But the only loss of information is the loss of Rabbi Shmuel ben Shlomo's personal document. The text of the Talmud, although it does not exist anymore as a material object, still exists. Well, one could argue, for a great scholar of Talmud, as Rabbi Shmuel ben Shlomo, destroying the text of the Talmud is not possible. The blindness of the scholar strengthens this claim. For a blind scholar, the burning of the Talmud won't cause a loss of information, because he does not read from material book, but from his memory. Indeed. But I will go one step further and say that for a medieval consumer of Talmudic texts, the lack of books never meant void of texts. Let's examine another example from the same period that deal with the lack of Talmudic texts. One of the people who were in Paris watching the flames was Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg, known as Maharam. Maharam was born in 13th century 20s, probably in Worms, and in the 13th century 40s he spent a couple of years in Paris, studying from Rabbi Yechiel from Paris and the above-mentioned Rabbi Shmuel ben Shlomo. Afterwards, he got back to Germany, where he spent the rest of his life and gained his reputation as the greatest 13th century Ashkenazic halachic authority. In a responsum he wrote when he was back in Germany, he was asked as follows. Sorry for the font, this is from the Cremon. Necessary for all these who browse in the Torah. How would we be happy without more added nashim to deal with the holidays and with the family life? Who will give perfume in our noses? Who could be smart without Seder Nizikin? The most complicated Seder, the one that we deal most in the halachic decisions. Who will judge and who will understand the right idea, and so on and so forth. The ethos of destruction. Oh, here's another one I didn't quote. The catastrophe caught me, and I was left alone without Mishnah and Talmud. The ethos of destruction expressed in this poem is opposite to the one expressed by Maharam. The Torah was burned, therefore it does not exist anymore. We can't live now according to the Talmud, we can't know what it says, we have forgot everything. Naturally, no responsa were left saying, we do not have Talmud, so we don't know what the law is. But other sources testifies what did people think about the Talmud after it was burned. Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchak Yerushalmi, known as Zekel Ashkenazi, printed in Sabionita in 1554 a commentary on the Agada part of the Talmud by Rabbi Shem Tov Ibn Shaput. In the end of the book, he apologized that he couldn't correct the Talmudic quotations cited in the book, because in our great sins no books can be found in these lands to correct this book according to them. Rabbi Avraham Rovancelo, who was the editor of Chavot HaLevavot, printed in Mantua 1559, a book full of quotations from the Talmud, writes in the end of the book as follows. We indexed all of the quotations from the Talmud except those from Tractate Avot, which is part of liturgical texts, so we know it by heart, according to the pages of this book, and not according to the order of the Talmud, because the Talmud is not in our hand these days in our sins, and we couldn't remember. ולא היה סיפק בידינו לשמור סדר המוקדם והמאוחר בפרק ופרק. I think I have translated, and we couldn't remember what came first and what second concerning the order of chapters, because we had to identify them according to what was left in our memory, and ומדרכים אחרים בלתי סלולים, and by other non-paved roads. Talmudic quotations can be corrected and indexed without Talmud books. As seen in Chavot HaLevavot afterwards, Talmudic memory exists as long as other non-paved roads to gain Talmudic knowledge from. But the writer doesn't count on them. The Talmudic text is considered as it placed solely in the physical book. The difference between the responses to the burnings reflect a change in the concept of the book. In medieval times, the text of the book and the material books were considered two different things. The text, especially one of religious importance, metaphysically exists in a complete manner, and the book was thought to be only a marginal copy of it, corrupted by the time and the ignorant scribes, not that different from the partial and not trustful human memory. Almost every colophon of medieval manuscript testifies the damaged condition of the copied book, of the book it was copied from, and the inefficient efforts of the scribe to fix it. In such a worldview, fire cannot destroy a piece of literature. The literary product is an abstract entity embodied temporarily in the body of a physical book. What fire can do, and does, is to insult the people who own the books. But in the early modern world, after the invention of the printing press, and following the humanistic approach to return ad fontes to the origins of the text, a gigantic effort was made to recreate the classical text in its full original form. For this goal, a large number of manuscripts were collected, and a massive textual synthesis was made according to them. The printers, Jews and non-Jews alike, expressed the idea that they were not producing a marginal corrupted copy of the text, but the text itself. This revolutionary book concept affected the way we think of books for centuries. It created the idea that when we hold the physical book, we hold also the idea concealed in it. So what did they burn when they burned the Talmud? In the 13th century, Paris, only a partial and neglected copy of it. But the Talmud itself, Torat Hashem Temimah Omedet La'ad. God's Torah is pure, enduring forever. But in the early modern era, the word was pinned into the material book. And when the book was burned, the word in the reader's mind was burned with it. Thank you.
Very brief moment for questions. Yossi.
Just one small remark. 1240 is definitely the first burning of the Talmud, but another last burning of the manuscripts. 1309, 1310, we have two burnings in France, and there are other events as well. It's just the opening, burning manuscripts.
So there is still what to burn after they burn the whole Talmud at the beginning.
Nadia.
Yes, I'd like to add one factual in addition to what Lucy said. There was the burning of the Talmud in southern Italy in 1270, and in Angeline, Italy, and regarding what was burned, in both the Paris burning and in southern Italy, they mention also the Krovot.
The what, sir?
Krovot.
The Krovot.
Which might explain how all these full carts of manuscripts arrived to the burning place. It might have been not just the Talmud, but also liturgical texts and prayers, other things.
Thank you. I'll add to that. I think in 16th century Italy, it was very easy to burn only the Talmud because there is we know how a Talmudic page look like, and I'm sure all of the people that the church sent, they told them, well, look for books that look like this. But Talmudic manuscript, they all look the same as it could be some, I don't know what, it could be Maimonides, it could be even a non Sifrei Chulin, Matkunim or something. I mean, it doesn't have to be, I think they are just gathered all the Hebrew books they could find. Maybe the archive of the yeshiva of Rabbi Yechiel in Paris or something like that.
Last question for now.
I just would like to mention, Avraham Bar Levav wrote about this subject, and he talks about the awareness of the library and in the minds of the rabbis and scholars, and it's always at that time a missing library. So we don't have to find these catastrophes of burning the Talmud. We have the same problems with responsa in ordinary life of his library, and I asked him now the name of his article. It's in Hebrew, and it's called "The Sacred Space of the Portable Homeland: An Archaeology of Hidden Libraries in Jewish Culture." So,
thank you very much.
Hey.
I just say one word about the picture. It was pictured in the Campo di Fiori, where the Browning was in 16th century was placed, and I'm sitting there and studying that Fiori.
Thank you very much, Yakov. We are now going to move on and back to the group from Barcelona, to one of the doctoral students of the group, Annabel González, who graduated in both Arabic and Hebrew studies at the University of Barcelona. And her doctoral thesis, the transmission of the manuscripts of the Talmud Bavli in Europe from the original Hebrew text to the Latin translation of the Talmud, Paris 1244-1245, consists in describing the early manuscripts of the Bavli preserved in Europe in order to reconstruct the plausible Talmudic sources for the medieval Latin translation. And today, we're going to be very kind to her. Yes, and we'll try. She's going to talk about Aramaic, Hebrew, Vorlage of the Latin Latal, which is the abbreviation of the group, right? Latin Talmud.
תודה רבה, Harvey. בוקר טוב לכולם. The Latin word Extracciones de Talmud is a translation of the Hebrew text of the Talmud Bavli. It emerged from an attentive analysis and comparison of the text, which highlights the presence of Hebraism as well as the fidelity to the original text. Although the Latin translation was elaborated with clear polemical theological aims, it is a literal and methodical translation from the Hebrew Aramaic text. Notwithstanding, until today, there is still no study that attempts to reconstruct a possible Talmudic textual tradition behind the medieval Latin translation of the text. It is for this reason that this paper will focus on to supply a brief characterization of the transmission of the Hebrew Talmud manuscripts preserved in Europe in order to gain further knowledge about the making of this translation and to reconstruct, if possible, the sources of the Latin text of the Extracciones. To find this Aramaic Hebrew manuscript tradition, I identify passages in the Latin text that differs from the canonical edition of Vilna Talmud. I seek in the medieval Hebrew manuscripts the source that was used to prepare the Latin translation. I look for difference in a number of areas, and mainly in onomastic loanwords, textual variants, and the order and composition of the thesis. When analyzing this difference between the Extracciones and the Hebrew Aramaic text, I realized that there is a manuscript tradition which matches the Latin text very well, namely the tradition which left traces in the Florence and Munich Talmudim. But before delving into textual details, here are some general data about these manuscripts. The Florence, being more or less contemporary to the Latin Talmud, this manuscript is interesting because it is very close to the Vorlage of the Latin translation and also contains as glossae marginales the Latin translation for the Extracciones. This is a partial Talmud Bavli in 3 volumes, although these 3 have been catalogued under a single shelf mark. The date of composition of the first volume is not the same as the other 2, and it should actually be considered apart from this which came later. In this slide you can see the content of the 3 volumes in a schematic form. The first, the 7, it has a colophon which dated at the year 1177, at least in its second codicological unit from the page 127 onwards. This part holds tractates from the 5th Talmudic order, although in a different order than in modern edition. Before this codicological unit, another one was born containing, but incompletely, the tractate Berachot, in the Vilna edition pertaining to the order Zeraim. Notwithstanding it is another codicological unit, it is close in date and style the subsequent one. The volumes 8 and 9 contain 5 tractates of the 4th order, Nezikin, and as we say, to have nothing to do with the previous volume. The 8 contains the first 2 tractates of Nezikin. The 9 contains the tractates number 3, 4, and 6, also of the order Nezikin. the Tractate 5 is missing. However, in the Extracciones, passages from Makot are indeed present. As claimed by Betaire, Sigat, and Glatzer, the codicological and paleographical characteristics of these manuscripts evoke the Ashkenaz of the beginning of the 14th century. Nevertheless, it explained this conclusion by saying that around 1300 the quality of the parchment changed. One does not distinguish between flesh and hair side, and the ruling is made using lead point. So, as in this parchment, one distinguishes well flesh and hair side, and the ruling is made with hair point, all we can really say is that the manuscripts are to be dated before 1300. And not at the beginning of the 14th century. The Latin reading, according to the Dr. Ulisse Cecchini, would be from the second half of the 13th century and a North European hand. The Dr. Menahem Katz considers that the manuscript is before the mid-13th century. This would allow the possibility to put them closer to the time of the Talmud trial. So, both the Hebrew Ashkenazi script and the Latin indicate that the manuscript was in Northern Europe, which would include Paris, before going to Italy. The Florence manuscripts contained more passages than the other purely Latin manuscripts that my colleagues have described above. This could suggest that the other manuscripts are the result of a selection and that the Florence manuscripts portrays an earlier stage before the said selection was made. Beyond that, we encounter differences at the textual level which clearly are not the result of the work of a misguided scribe, but point to the fact that Florence and the rest of the tradition portray two different versions of the text. This manuscript is undoubtedly the most important manuscript because it's the only one that contains the entire Talmud and also includes the minor treatises and other rabbinical works. Besides, a particular feature is placing of the Mishnah in the center of the bifolio in square angular letters, while the Gemara around it occupies most of the pages and is written in a smaller rabbinical script. In order to bring the text of the Mishnah and the Gemara together, the scribe aired the text by leaving blank spaces and often extended the last letters of the lines of the Gemara so that the folios are pleasant to read despite the density of the text. In both Mishnah and Gemara, the titles, the first words, and the colophon of each treatise are written in a square script. The copies has carefully corrected their own copy, and other hands have added glosses and comments. According to Professor Friedman, the manuscript was prepared with great care and precision and represents a revolutionary change in the writing of the Bible. However, the beautiful handwriting, notwithstanding, the manuscript is full of slips of the pen and omissions. Many names are not written precisely, and the textual tradition is edited in many places of the basis of parallel versions. The copies of the manuscript was Salomon ben Samson. The date of composition indicated at the end of the order Kodashim is Kislev 12:51-3. After the colophon, there is an addition by a proofreader, Yehoshua, in small characters. While at the end of the order Tohorot, an additional colophon in which we can read Tebet 17:51-3. The name Baltatia ben Joseph was written over and erased the text, but manuscript was written for Yehoshua Benjamin, who wrote most of the glosses. Despite typical French paleographical features and the model of divorce dated in Paris in 1308 and according to Colette Sirat, the copies never lived in France, and it is probably that Salomon ben Samson was born in Germany into one of the families of Jews expelled from France in 1306. Nevertheless, Dr. Menahem Katz considers this manuscript is written in France. The central part of the manuscript is the Talmud Bavli, although there are other works in the first and last pages, like a shir from Yehoshua, the Seder Olam Rabbah, Seder Tanaim V'Amoraim, a genealogy of the owner, the model of Get, and etc. The sequence of Babli tractates in the manuscripts differ from the traditional order in the Mishnah. In this slide, you can see the schematic content of the Munich manuscript. The tractate Berachot is placed at the end of the Seder Moed, and tractate Nida is placed at the end of Neshim. In addition, the order of Moed is arranged to reflect, with some exceptions, the yearly cycle of festivals. The order of Nezikin is also arranged in a more logical sequence. At the end, there is tractate Eduyot that has no Talmud. The Seder Nashim is also arranged in a more logical order and includes at the end the tractate Nida. The tractate of Avot is written after the colophon at the end of Serayim and Tohorot, followed by the minor tractates and other works. After this short description of few key elements of the manuscripts, I will proceed to considering the textual evidence, offering some examples of difference between the Latin text and Vilna Talmud, and how these variants can be clarified almost always either by the Florence manuscript or by the textual tradition of the manuscript of Munich. In this example, if we compare the Latin text of Sanhedrin with Vilna edition and Florence and Munich manuscript, we can notice on the one hand that both in Florence and Munich we find reflected the Latin est homo, that is, there is one man. However, in the Florence manuscript, the words among you and who deserves are missing. To find an exact concordance between the Latin and the Hebrew text, we must see the text of the Munich manuscript. Intervals corresponding to Benechem est homo with Yesh Ka'an Adam, and Kidignus est corresponding to Shehawi. In this example of the Metzia, we can see that the order for men descending to hell in the text Extracciones de Talmud differs that the order of Vilna, but is the same as that in the manuscripts of Florence and Munich. The first sentence, in blue, Ille qui imponit cognomen proximo suo, corresponds to someone who gives his friend an embarrassing nickname. The second sentence, in green, in black, it qui facit audescere faciem proximi sui, matches with someone who makes his friend's face turn with white in public. The third sentence, in green, et qui jacet cum conjugata corresponds to someone who lies with another man's wife. However, the name of the rabbi in the Extracciones and in the Florence manuscript is Rabbi Yohanan, while in Munich and in Vilna edition it is Rabbi Hanina. In this case, the Latin text follows the tradition of the Florence manuscript. In this example of Avodah Zarah, we find a correspondence between the Latin text of the Extracciones and that of the Munich manuscript. Unfortunately, this treatise is missing from the Florence manuscript. Observe in the Latin text the sentence underlined. The words in hoc saeculo, in this world, are missing in the Vilna edition. Notwithstanding, in the margins of Munich manuscript is written by a different hand, Baolam Hazeh, that is in hoc saeculo. In the examples above, we have seen that the textual variations between the Latin translation and canonical edition of the Vilna Talmud could be explained by the Florence or Munich manuscripts. However, in this example of Tamid, it does not seem to be the case, as the name Henina does not appear in any manuscript. Nonetheless, confusion between the name Hanina and the name Huna can be supposed to explain this incongruence. The following example of Sanhedrin clearly demonstrates that the Florence manuscript is a witness of textual revisions applied to the Latin translation of the Talmud. If we compare the Latin Florence with the Latin of the rest of the manuscripts, we can notice two things. First, that Florence translates the Hebrew tzedakah more etymologically with justitia, and then adds a gloss explaining the meaning as a charity in this context. The rest of the tradition filters that, leaving only the gloss. Second, that the last sentence is also a translation more similar to the Hebrew Florence than in the rest of the tradition. Florence, very much like the Vilna Talmud, say, "This is true, but this happened when bread and dates were given. However, in a place in which money was given, this prescription was not to be considered." We may observe that the Latin translation added Rashi's glosses explaining why the biblical verse is related to what Rabbi Eliezer says. The Bible says about Jerusalem, where justice lived, because alms were given to the poor. Now, on the other hand, murderers, because the poor trust, thus we have to give them alms, but when the latter fail to do so, they let the poor die of hunger. Let us now pass to comparison between the Latin and the Hebrew texts of Florence and Munich. It shows how Florence has tzedek, that is justice, instead of tzedakah, charity, with good explained the first translation with justitia. Munich has also, like Vilna edition, tzedakah. Moreover, we can see that in Florence and in Munich the biblical quotation is entirely written, as in the Latin, while the Vilna edition only has the first part. In the mentions of the rabbis at the beginning, Rabbi Yitzchak is absent in Munich, in Florence as in the Latin. In the following example, also of Sanhedrin, we can see that the Latin translation is very close to the textual tradition of Munich manuscript. If we look at the Latin, we can see that it is very similar to the Vilna version, but the scriptural passage quoted is not as in Vilna, from Proverbs, but from Psalms. The text in the Florence manuscript does not contain this text, but the text from Proverbs, as Vilna does. Florence cannot therefore be the source of the Latin translation. However, in the manuscript of Munich, the two biblical quotations appears, Proverbs in the body of the text and Psalms in the interlinear space. To this a further remark, this history is told also in Berachot and Avodah Zarah, which are also translated into Latin. In the passage of Berachot, both scriptural passages are quoted, Psalms and Proverbs, and the passage from Avodah Zarah has only the Psalm. So one could think that in the passage of Sanhedrin, the translator, who had in front of himself the Florence manuscript, integrated the missing quotation from what he knew was present in Berachot. However, why integrate the quotation from Psalms, which is not there, and then leave out the quotation from Proverbs, which is? It is far more likely that a translator had before his eyes a text with the quotations of Psalms, like a manuscript with the textual tradition of Munich. You can see in the slide the Latin text of Sanhedrin, which is present on the left margin of the Florence manuscript, misses its original passage in the Hebrew-Aramaic corpus of the text. The Talmudic text of Florence skips this passage, as one can see from the following table, which compares Florence and Vilna concerning this and the ones immediately before and after it. The text of Florence goes directly from "He who formed it shall not grant it favor" to Rabbi Eliezer said, "Any person who," without our passage between them. As a consequence, the Latin text, which is in the margin of the same folio, cannot be a direct translation of the text of the same manuscripts right next to it, because previously this text is missing. The Latin text must be a copy of an already existing translation. For conclude, after the Babylonian Talmud reached Ashkenazi Christian Europe around the 11th century, it became the core of medieval Jewish studies, and the different Talmudic schools copied the manuscripts of the Babylonian Talmud. Christians tried to prove that the Jews were wrong in their way of interpreting the scripture, and the translation of several passages of the Talmud in Latin became a new method of refuting Judaism. Despite this, even today, there is still no study that attempts to reconstruct plausible Hebrew Talmudic manuscript sources for this translation. My opinion concerning the Hebrew sources behind the Latin translation of the Talmud is thus, given textual similarities portrayed by the manuscript of Florence and by the Munich, permit us to think that it belongs to a tradition very close to the Vorlage. However, a paleographical evaluation of the Latin writing of Florence seems to hint at a dating around 1300, which of course postdates the controversy, but its content reflects a prior stage to the one contained in the Paris. The provenance of the Florence manuscript seems to be Northern Europe, given the shape both of the Hebrew and the Latin writing. This, and the fact that it reflects an earlier stage of the process, leads us to think that it was copied by someone close to the entourage responsible for the translation. Concerning to the manuscript of Munich, which was written in middle 14th century, probably in Germany, by a scribe from one of the families expelled from France, it is clear that cannot be the Vorlage for the Latin translation. Nevertheless, we had seen that this manuscript could clarify some examples of the difference between the Latin text and the Hebrew canonical text. So it is probably that almost all the manuscripts that the scribe used to compose the Munich Talmud were also used to prepare the Latin translation. Notwithstanding not to be the Vorlage, both the Florence manuscript and textual tradition of Munich are a witness of primary importance for the transmission of the Extracciones de Talmud and for the research on the redaction process. תודה רבה.
Questions? Country, please. Yakov.
Thank you very much for the beautiful presentation and the detailed research. I wondered, I mean, concerning the slide we have seen in the morning, first of all, Dora, or maybe it was one of the other slides, we have seen that there are no quotations from all of the Seder Moed, all of the order of Moed, except from Shabbat and Megillah. And I wondered, of Yordan, sorry, thank you. And I wondered if it could be that they had the entire Talmud as reflected in the Munich manuscript or one of its fathers that contained the whole Talmud, or they might have a couple of partial manuscripts, as we have in various libraries, and I guess there were even then. I mean, we know they had Nezikin and Kodashim, they had Brachot and Shabbat, they had Nida, and they had the whole Seder Nashim. And therefore, I suggest they had a couple of partial manuscripts and not one of the Munich branches, because then they had the entire Talmud, and there are a couple of very juicy passages in Moed that if they had in front of them, I guess they would chew them. I mean, from Chagiga and from Yoma, a couple of comments about Gentiles, about Christianity that they couldn't miss.
Yeah.
I mean, I can maybe add something to that, because I should have probably said that in the general introduction. It is indeed the case that you find references to the Talmud in Christian literature, both in the Extracciones but also in Thibaut de Cézanne, referring just to 4 orders. Mm-hmm. So they say the Talmud has 4 orders. There are exactly, there are precisely only 4 orders, but then you find in the Extracciones the idea that there is more, because referring to Mishnah, they say, well, there is 4, but there are 2 books, volumes, which are very difficult to get hold of. Mm-hmm. That's what you find in the Extracciones. And the remaining 4, or the 4, they are described as 4 volumes. So the idea that this is this relates to your paper, by the way, the idea that this is books, and this is concrete texts is very important to the Christians, because that's why they actually can condemn and burn it. And they describe this textuality and say it's 4 volumes, and each of them is much larger than the whole of our Bible. It seems that they had 4 manuscripts. If we take this seriously, because we discussed that also, if they had separate tractates, so 20 manuscripts, 40 manuscripts, but from the description it seems it were 4 volumes, and they say it explicitly. 4 manuscripts.
We're going to continue, otherwise we won't have time for all the papers. So gracias. And now, Eulàlia. Eulàlia is also a member of the, is a postdoctoral member of the group, and she graduated in classical philology and Semitic philology at the University of Barcelona, and her research interests are Semitic historiolinguistics, the verbal system of Semitic languages, the biblical Hebrew and Aramaic languages, and the transmission of biblical texts during the intertestamental and rabbinic periods. And she is going to talk to us about the Semitic and Old French loanwords in the Latin Talmud.
Harvey. I have prepared for you a handout, but I have no PowerPoint. May I have more light? Yes? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, they are all. This communication focuses on a particularly interesting topic, namely onomastics in the Latin Talmud. The study of proper names, place names and anthroponyms, as well as the Hebrew, Aramaic and Old French loanwords that we find in the extractiones help us to approach the reality background of this Latin translation of the Babylonian Talmud, written in Paris a few years after the disputation. Regarding the topic on anthroponyms, I presented last summer at the 7th Congress of Jewish Studies a communication on the rabbinic anthroponym in the Latin Talmud because of the valuable information they provide. In the absence of a critical edition of the Talmud Ravli, the onomastics and, in particular, the rabbinic anthropony becomes an important tool in relation to Talmudic textual criticism. The cases where the name of a rabbi is not the same of that quoted in the Vilna edition show us that they should not be considered as a simply lapsus, but the Latin translator reads different Talmudic textual traditions preserved even in the Florence Talmud and also in the Munich Talmud, or other manuscripts, as Annabel González have just exposed. In other words, these examples can be used as a tool to clarify which kind of manuscripts tradition of the Babylonian Talmud could lie as a vorlage behind this translation, as well as the degree of accuracy to be found in this work. Today, however, I will focus on Semitic, Hebrew and Aramaic loanwords, as well as on the Old French expressions that are found in the extractiones. As an appendix for the Latin edition of the Latin Talmud, prepared by Dr. de la Cruz and Dr. Cecchini, I have done an exhaustive study of these Semitic and Old French loanwords, and the final list is a complete one and helps the scholar to give a finished and detailed vision on the topic that can be complementary to the partial work offered by Henmer Havia in his article of 1966 published in Journal of Semitic Studies 11. Let me now comment on broadly the characteristics of both groups of borrowings, which will help us to reach clear and firm conclusions. The exhaustive list of Hebrew borrowings that will be published as an appendix for the Latin edition, see handout number 1 for some Hebrew borrowings quoted in the extracciones can help us to research different ways, such as the degree of linguistic Hebrew skills of the team of translators, the accuracy of the translation of the words into Latin, the fidelity of the translation regarding the original Hebrew, the Hebrew tradition that underlies behind the translations, among other informations. Regarding the nature of these Hebrew borrowings, most of the loanwords appearing in the Latin text of the extracciones are in fact realia rabbinica, as the following cases show. We can find names of months, see handout number 1.1, like the nouns Nisan or Adar, or also names of Jewish festivities, see handout number 1.2, like Hanukkah or Rosh Hashanah. There are also names of Talmudic tractates transcribed into Hebrew, see handout 1.3, like Avodah Zarah, Baba Kama, Baba Metzia, Berachot, Sanhedrin, Kazazim, in Hebrew Seder Kodashim, Moed, Seder Moed, etc. Among these Hebraism, technical terms of rabbinic and Jewish literature are also found in the extracciones, see handout number 1.4, like for example, Agadah, Baraita, Kal Vahomer, Dikduk, Mikra, Musaf, Parasha, Perek, Perus, Shammai, and Tefilat HaSha'ar. And we can also find some Hebrew names of letters, etc. In my opinion, some of these Hebrew borrowings could have been, in fact, loanwords already in the vernacular modern language of translator, Judeo-Old French, and also in Latin, as the following specific owned terms of Judaism. See handout number 1.5. Terms like Goy or Goim, Ger, a proselyte convert to Judaism, Guf, literally body, the name of the chamber in heaven that contains the souls created during the 6 days of creation, Yeshiva, rabbinic school, Lilim, from Aramaic Lilin, night demons, Min, sectarian, and the substantive Minut, heresy, infidelity, Shaddai, omnipotence in Latin, Shem Hameforash, the Tetragrammaton, etc. There are some cases in the extracciones where the word is itself a loan word in rabbinic Hebrew or Aramaic, as the following cases. We can find Greek loanwords into rabbinic Hebrew transcribed into Latin, see handout number 1.6, like for example, Alachia, an Aramaic loanword, Delaria, a noun borrowed perhaps from Greek diarrhoea, in Latin infirmitas. Also Epikoros, a Hebrew loanword, Apikoros, borrowed from Greek Epikuros, Epicurean, and also Latin military, Latin loanwords into rabbinic Hebrew transcribed into Latin, see handout 1.7, like for example, Gitzra, borrowed from Hebrew Gastera, military camp, that is also borrowed from Latin castra, courts, Keton from Hebrew karton, an enclosure, a noun borrowed from Latin cors, cortis, and also legion from Hebrew legion, a word borrowed from Latin legio. And as far as the Old French words in Latin Gallice is concerned, see handout number 2, where a list of some examples containing the Old French words that are found in the Latin Talmud is given, being most of them nouns and verbs, but also Old French phrases. These loanwords were given as explanations for the Latin translation to clarify the semantic context of the Latin word, but also to be helpful towards a better understanding of terms, even by those readers who were proficient in Latin. These Gallic words are often nouns and expressions with some difficulty regarding their translation from Hebrew into Latin, because they belong to specific semantic Jewish fields, such as rabbinical realia, see handout 2.1, as for example, attunement, a noun that translates Latin ordinatio, liber, and Hebrew seder, sequence order, miaudes, a plural substantive that translates Latin sententias, and Hebrew halachot, practices, rules, and also tallament, a word that translates Latin decisiones, auctoritatis, propositiones, versus, and Hebrew pasuk, division, interval, or biblical verse. We can find also weights and measures, see handout 2.2, as for example, boisel, that translates Latin cabum and Aramaic cabin, a measure of capacity, or harobin, possibly an Aramaic loanword that through Arabic, from Aramaic harubin, carobs. There are also some instruments and tools, as for example, see handout 2.3, course, a plural noun that translates Latin bucinas, and Hebrew shifure, trumpets, horns. We can find also the name of Jewish festivities translated into Old French, see handout 2.4, as for example, a strena, a singular substantive that translates Latin strena, and Hebrew Hanukkah, inauguration, and also the plural form loggias, translating Latin tabernacula, and Hebrew sukkah, tabernacle hut. Some medical realia and remedies were also translated into Old French in the Latin text of the Extractiones, see handout 2.5, as for example, fardes, that translates the Latin noun stibium, and Hebrew puch, antinomy, or Old French ispergos, as a therapeutic beverage, a word that translates Latin aspargos and Hebrew ispargus. And the illness, maus malans, a compound expression that translates Latin species mortis and Hebrew substantive ashkera, diphtheria. It's important to note that some of the Gaelic words of this list were also given by Rashi in his commentaries that contain hundreds of examples. Well, to sum up, we have seen an overview of some onomastic examples of Semitic and Old French loanwords that can be found in the Latin translation of Extractiones. As far as the onomastic features are concerned, we can observe that the Latin Talmud has inherent difficulties due to the Latin vernacular, Old French, and the Latin language to transcribe Hebrew words, especially regarding the transcription of guttural and emphatic consonants, although some phenomena in the Latin transcription informs us that the translator or translators had profound knowledge of the Masoretic Hebrew grammar. It's also interesting to note that many of the biblical and rabbinic realia are transcribed as if they had been heard orally, because there is a large number of linguistic phenomena which can only be explained through orality. This fact might indicate that the translation of the original Talmudic text was, at least at times, an oral process. The onomastic list of borrowings I have prepared for the Latin edition is an exhaustive compilation that could be used as a research tool. Behind the Latin transcription of these Hebrew and Old French words, valuable information could be extracted, such as the quality of this transcription, the accuracy of the translation with respect to the Hebrew original text, as well as the handwritten Hebrew tradition that underlies in the Extractiones, among others. Otherwise, the presence of Old French loanwords and expressions inform us that the final translator that has this language as vernacular tongue. These Old French words are important in the development of historical dictionaries of the Old French language, because in certain cases they are the first documented testimony of the word historically speaking. תודה רבה. Thank you very much for your attention.
Anyone want to ask any questions? I can say that I watched Eulàlia working on this over the years, and it takes a special kind of mind to be able to do this, and it will be an amazing tool for scholars who want to use the volume of the Session2, perhaps for things that none of us even considered, right, when we embarked on the project. Thank you. Okay, to conclude this session and bring us to lunch, to something slightly different, and we're going to hear from Judith Weiss, who studies medieval Kabbalah and Renaissance Christian Kabbalah, and for those of you who don't yet know, will be joining us as a member of the Department of Jewish Thought from the next academic year. She's a great expert on Guillaume Postel and has published a number of books dealing with Guillaume Postel and his and has made editions of his work. One of them is A Christian Kabbalistic Messiah in the Renaissance, Guillaume Postel and the Book of the Zohar, and On the Conciliation of Nature and Grace Restituted into One, a Latin introduction, translation and commentary on the Zohar by Guillaume Postel. And she today will talk to us about challenges, about Latin and Kabbalah in the Renaissance, challenges and opportunities.
I'd like to thank the CSOC and Professor Haynes for inviting me to participate in this fascinating workshop. Can everyone hear me? Everyone? Okay. I'm sure you're wondering why am I here and what does Latin Kabbalah have to do with Latin Talmud? Well, I have to say that I was also a bit surprised at first, but as the title I've chosen says, challenges and opportunities, and what follows, I will take this challenge as an opportunity to sketch the Talmudic aspect of Renaissance Christian Kabbalah, and then touch upon very few examples of how the tension of Hebrew-Latin functioned within this context, with the challenges it posed and with the opportunities it offered. And I apologize in advance that everything will be quite brief due to time limitations. To begin with, for the Catholics studying Jewish Kabbalah in the Renaissance, Kabbalah was indeed not essentially different from the rabbinic literature. These Christians fully adopted the Jewish narrative concerning the Kabbalah, namely as the oral law, lex oris, we've seen different designations earlier, whispered by God on Moses' ear on Mount Sinai. This meant that the entire gamut of Tannaite literature was in general accepted as the true and authentic sacred lore of divine origin, just like the Old Testament. In some ways, it was even considered as more valid than the Old Testament, since no newer oral law had been given afterwards. On the other hand, the study of this oral law entailed for them major difficulties of the kind that we as scholars are used to designate as methodological. Namely, as this divine authentic tradition has been transmitted through various highly suspect channels, mostly Pharisee ones, the text had to be examined with care in order to separate the wheat from the chaff. The chaff naturally being anything legislative or halachic. What was left was the Midrashim, found either in independent volumes or within the Talmud and Mishnah, and of course, the Sephirotic literature. Sephirotic literature was also divided into, in a way which somewhat accords again with our terminology as modern researchers, the first primary sources, namely the pseudepigraphic literature ascribed to certain Tannaites as Simon son of Yochai, Rashbi, or Nechunya son of Kana. And here we find mainly the Zohar and Bahir, which, it should be stressed, were considered and designated as Midrashim also by the Kabbalists themselves. The secondary literature, so-called, of course, was the one composed by the great medieval rabbis knowledgeable in Sephirotic matters, such as Joseph Chikatila, and is soon to become the Latin Porta Lucis. It is quite remarkable to see, therefore, that Guillaume Postel, the renowned Orientalist and mystic active in the second third of the 16th century, not only used the term Gemara, but developed it into a theological notion endowed with an interesting messianic meaning based on its root gamar, and its relation to the finis of the world, its end in both this word's meanings. As Postel explained in his French treatise Le Trésor de Prophétie de l'Univers, the term Gemara refers to the entire oral law given on Mount Sinai, including the Mishnah, Midrashim, and of course the entire pseudo-epigraphic Kabbalistic literature. However, the term Gemara he developed into an independent general designation whose meaning is annihilation and purpose or end, referring to his messianic notions of universal restitution and absolution. See, for example, a comment from his aforementioned Trésor de Prophétie. No? Okay. Car il faut que tout soit réduit à son lieu, ordre, office et usage vrai, ce qui est la vraie Gemara ou Gomeri. As has been shown by scholars, as Sucre and others, Postel's ingenious reading of sacred text relied on the linguistic hermeneutic approach which he designated as emethology, deriving from the Hebrew word emet and contradistinctive to the Greek etymos. This hermeneutical technique relies on phonetic resemblance between words in distant languages when no formal etymological affinity is evident. Going back to the Gemara, it is fascinating to see that in his mythological manner, he connected the Gemara to the biblical figure of Gomer, whom he considered as the ancestor of the French and Germans. By so doing, Postel created a link between the whole amplitude of the oral law preserved by the Jews and the ancient ancestors of the peoples he believed are to save the world. The essence of this Gemara, sometimes also Gomeria or Gomeri, is the natural ratio, to be restored within all mankind in the coming Messianic age, for the restitution of all men and in order to bring all things to their perfection, namely to their end, goal, or Gemara. Whoever is familiar with Postel's knows that the final stage of perfection, actualization, and restitution is always of a feminine nature. Indeed, hence, the Gemara's female aspect, which I'm assuming he also connected to the grammatical morphology of this Aramaic term. Okay, so now that I've convinced you that medieval Kabbalah is a branch of the Talmud, in the remainder of my talk, I'd like to address some issues relating to Latin-Hebrew dynamics and translation issues regarding this corpus. In general, the writers that I study in the 16th century read the Jewish texts in the original, not the translated versions. These writers sometimes translated the Hebrew or Aramaic text into Latin and very often composed their own original adaptations of the Kabbalistic material. This naturally entailed specific challenges for each of them. That is also it entailed specific challenges for each of them, but it must be stressed that it also opened new horizons and new hermeneutical opportunities. Due to the time limitations, I chose to share with you just a few examples of these challenges and, more importantly, opportunities. The examples are taken from the writings of two figures I've been studying in the past 8 years, Egidio de Viterbo, active in the first third of the 16th century, and Guillaume Postel, active mainly in the second third of the century. So Egidio de Viterbo was an Augustinian cardinal of very high esteem, closely connected to the Medici popes. Egidio was well versed in the classical world of myth and philosophy, and well trained in biblical and rabbinic Hebrew. He collected and studied every piece of Kabbalah he could get his hands on, and opened his house to Jews and converts willing to copy for him or teach him Kabbalistic lore. He was also a millenarist, drafting extensive monographs in which he described his ingenious and original plans for his soon-to-come Messianic age, feeding extensively on Jewish material, mainly Kabbalah, together with pagan myth, elegantly dressing all this richness in exquisite literary form. One such draft by Egidio, never translated into any modern language, is his magnificent and capturing magnum opus entitled Shekinah. In the past few years, I've been cooperating with Yehuda Libes in order to produce an annotated Hebrew translation to this voluminous piece, and I will share a few examples of our work with you today. For a purpose, it should be stressed that Egidio came to know and appreciate Kabbalah through his Hebreistic work on the Bible. For him, the reason that Kabbalah was the real and most profound commentary on the Bible was mainly because the masters of Kabbalah, whom he calls the Arameans, were well versed in Hebrew and could read the original version of the Bible, detecting and comprehending the secrets it veils. In the Shekinah, he often celebrates the many Kabbalistic secrets revealed once the original Hebrew is studied. Here now, O Caesar, it is the Shekhinah. The Shekhinah is addressing the Caesar Karl V. Lo pachot. What our people do not know, it is written in the holy tongue. This is my name Leolam, but one letter is missing. Nor is it written Olam, but Alam, which means in a hidden matter. That is also the source for the Latin word Klam. Here the Hebrew spelling of the biblical word allowed Egidio to suggest an esoteric explanation to the verse, and also to restore a Latin word to its presumable Hebrew source, relying on phonetic resemblance of the gutturals Ain and K. In the next paragraph, the Hebrew source enabled Egidio to endow the verse with a completely new meaning of a sephirotic nature. Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted for them, for they are gone. That is not what Jeremiah said. Undermines the Shekhinah's inspiration, but enenu, which means for he is gone. Who can console but the groom? Both my children and my groom were taken away from me, and no one can console me because I do not have a consoler. This time the singular form of enenu in the Hebrew version allowed Egidio to claim that the Shekhinah's groom, the male Sfirat Tiferet, is the one gone, and that is why no one was left to console her over the loss of her children. Indeed, this interpretation appears a few times in the Zohar, but Egidio does not mention this fact here. And I'm not sure whether in this case he adopted the Zoharic idea or just used his common sense. One last bit from Egidio. The divine name Shaddai, designating the Sephira Shekhinah, Chut, has been understood already in rabbinic literature as deriving from the word dai, namely sufficient, enough, and more specifically referring to the termination of the world's creation process. But this enough was not enough for Egidio, and he added to it the Latin dimension, this time referring to the first and not the second part of the name Shaddai. Therefore, the last of the divine names, which is Shaddai, is consecrated to me alone, to the Shekhinah, a name which indeed means enough. And from there, the Latins created the word Fat, using these first letters, which are Sad, while transforming the D into a T, as these two letters do tend to interchange. Moving about 20 years later to Postel, I will say just a few words on this fascinating figure and then look at one example. Guillaume Postel, also a real genius in many humanistic disciplines and most prominently languages, came from a simple and poor origin which did not deter him from attaining high-rank academic reputation already in his early 20s, around Egidio's death in 1532. He began experiencing mystical visions, calling him to herald the messianic age of world union under French rule. He came across Kabbalah and began to study the Zohar, Bahir, Lekanati's commentary on the Torah, mainly with Johann Widmanstätter, and later with a middle-aged Venetian mystic who he believed was the designated Papa Angelicus, or should we say Angelica. The two met daily over 18 months, having Zohar Chevrutas, with Postel translating the Aramaic Zohar to the Venetian dialect so that Joanna could understand, and Joanna explaining to him the symbolic meaning of the Zoharic text, according to her understanding. During the 1550s, Postel produced Latin translations and commentaries on Sefer Yetzirah, the Zohar, the Bahir, the Kanati, and Genesis Rabbah. Most of these never published. As we've seen earlier with his unique interpretation to the word Gemara, Postel was very flexible in his attitude toward the Hebrew and Aramaic, both lexically, as his use of a mythology demonstrates, and mainly syntactically. I will conclude my talk today with one example of the syntactical aspect in Postel, as we've seen a few lexical issues earlier with Egidio. as I've shown elsewhere in his Zohar Latin translation, which he completed by the beginning of 1554. Postel shows an extremely loose attitude toward morphological categories, translating adverbs as adjectives and vice versa, nouns as verbs and vice versa, and fixed prepositions as nouns or adjectives. As I've claimed there, this should be seen primarily as expressing his unique attitude toward the esoteric aspect of the Hebrew and Aramaic, and is only very seldom a result of simple shortcomings. Let's look at one bit of his Zohar translation and commentary, and I'm sorry for not reading the original text, I don't have enough time. But there will be an English translation afterwards. So what we see here is first the verb nafik in the original Aramaic is an active verb denoting a wide range of actions, but to the best of my knowledge it cannot be used as a transitive verb, as the latter would have to be apik. In the Zohar it is depicted how a spark of darkness proceeds from the head of infinity into the concealed of the concealed. However, Postel translated this verb, which is in an active singular third person, as a plural form, this forgiven. And it seems that he is relating it not to the spark of darkness, but to the darkness itself in the plural, an element which he introduced in his comment, which you don't see here, it's in brackets. Second, the same verbal form nafik appears immediately following, as the Zohar describes how inside the same spark of darkness a flow emerged and displayed colors bloom. In this case, Postel translated the verb efundebat, adhering to the correct number, but contrary to the original, the Latin form is transitive. This incurs a further misreading, as Postel regarded the subject of the sentence as the object. It seems that, to his understanding, the spark is still the object, and therefore the spark poured the flow forth. And then third, the Zohar goes on and tells us how that flow, baka velo baka, it's air or aura. In the Aramaic, these are active verbal forms of the third singular person, but Postel regarded them as present passive participles and adjoined them to a noun mentioned in the preceding sentence, the secret of infinity, which is originally part of a phrase describing the flow. This left Postel with a non-predicated unit, though there is no indication that he considered this as a problem. On the contrary, it is obvious that he found a great deal of truth in this and the new text he produced, since he commented on this as follows. He says, the secret of all secrets, or the secret inside the secret, is the created wisdom, while eternity is God. He then goes on to explain that the created wisdom is at one and the same time split and not split, the baka, since it incorporates both the divided and undivided or indistinct elements. So here's the English translation. To conclude, for Egidio and Postel, as well as for other Christian writers of this period, translating Hebrew and Aramaic Kabbalah into Latin was not easy, but it was worth the while. It opened for them an incredibly flexible hermeneutic dimension in terms of lexicon, morphology, and syntax, and they made the best out of it, each according to his own theological and hermeneutical tendencies. Thank you.
Questions? Federico.
Thank you for your conference. I was wondering if, just to substantiate your idea that what you are talking about the Talmud, by also mentioning the Kabbalah, of course you are aware that... okay, that's much better. So I begin again from the start. So thank you again for your conference. Would like just to substantiate your claim that we might understand under Talmud Kabbalah as well, because of course before Postel and Egidio Vitabo we have the great example from Mitredates who translated for Pico a great deal of Kabbalistic texts, but especially he delivered this 70% Domini in front of the Pope, in which he claimed that he would speak about the Vetus Talmud, in which, elaborating on Yechiel of Paris, he was arguing that Kabbalah was as ancient, at least, as the Talmud, meaning it was all the stuff. So somehow it could be a nice connection. I don't know if Postela was ever able to access these documents somehow, but anyhow, it's very traditional way of describing the Kabbalah as a very old, ancient text, and the Talmud is just the textual lore on which it elaborates. And since he's referring to the Zohar, we know that Zohar is trying to imitate Tanaim, at least in the most formal way of speaking of Kabbalistic thoughts, which are a little different from Gigatila and the Sabbath. In this very case, speaking of specific portions, it is a mystical commentary on Scripture. No, sorry, just wanted to elaborate and substantiate your position.
Thank you.
Well, Judith, actually, it's what I say is it's wonderful to contrast the different approaches, right? Eulàlia just before, who shows just how carefully the translators try to make their translation as close as possible, or try to use terminology that could be understandable to the readers in the 13th century, and then you come to Egidio de Viterbo and Guillaume Postel, who also supposedly want to translate as accurately as possible, but through their translations, basically create a whole new context and meaning. So I'd like to thank you both and everyone else in this session for their papers.